Now, next we have a session where panelists will talk on trauma-informed practices, an educator's perspective. Please put your hands together for Mellisa Sadin, moderator, Dr. Sonia Toledo, Dr. Pamela Roberts, Benjamin Keys, and Sueanne E. Mckinney.
My name is Dr. Mellisa Sadin. I'm honored and privileged to be here moderating these very creative, intelligent thought leaders around trauma-informed education. I am the founder and the executive director of Ducks and Lions Trauma Sensitive Resources, and we provide professional development for schools. So would each one of you follow suit and please introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dr. Sonia Toledo. I am the founder and CEO of Dignity of Children. We provide services to school and community-based organizations that serve youth, basically to focus on creating environments where our children are emotionally and physically safe and fully self-expressed so they could thrive. How we do that is we provide training, development, curriculum for the teachers themselves, and organizational structure to support culture.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Pamela Cotton Roberts, and I am an educator and have been an educator for over 40 years. Mm-hmm. And I have seen education evolve, and it has turned around from non-technology, where when I was in the 80s, we had the computers was along the whole wall of an institution till we had, my first computer was a Radio Shack Tandy 1000. And from there, we just evolved. And I can remember as an educator in 1987, when they were bringing out technology, letting us know that in the future that we were going to be ordering things from Kroger's and Ralph's and those type of stores. We couldn't believe it. We couldn't imagine it to where we are today. So I've been a teacher. I've been a principal. I've been a superintendent, and I've worked in higher education till now. I have my own business. I'm an entrepreneur of a PAM Performing Arts Incorporated. So I've come a long way, and I'm ready to continue to see it evolve.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sueanne Mckinney. I'm an associate professor of urban education at Old Dominion University, located in Norfolk, Virginia. My main goal, or the courses that I focus on, is preparing our pre-service teachers, number one, to want to teach in a high poverty school, and number two, how to be successful in that type of environment. And I hate to tell you, I have you beat. I'm 41 years in education, and I actually spent 16 years as a teacher in high poverty schools in Norfolk, Virginia, before becoming a professor at the university.
Hi, I'm Dr. Benjamin Keys, and I am currently professor and director of the Center for Trauma and Resiliency Studies at Divine Mercy University in Sterling, Virginia. I am also the executive director of the Green Cross Academy for Traumatology. At the university, we teach students, graduate students that are training as mental health counselors or psychologists in aspects of trauma, which cover both first response trauma, which is our connection to Green Cross, and long-term trauma. And then we use a process that I like to call immersive education, where we immerse into a culture where there is a lot of trauma, and we spend 2 to 2.5 weeks in that culture, working alongside the social workers and the counselors within that country, which give our students just an amazing wealth of practice and an amazing wealth of information in learning how to be a counselor. More importantly, how to be a trauma counselor. And then we also connect with Green Cross Academy, which primarily responds to situations of disaster or crisis by deploying teams throughout the United States.
Thank you. Okay, so what I was hoping that we could do with this tremendously talented and, if someone can do the math, hundreds of years of experience, I'll throw myself into that high number as well. So I thought that we would tackle some of the pressing topics around trauma-informed education in schools that we are all in the middle of currently. So there's trauma-informed, trauma-responsive, trauma-skilled, trauma. So if you would, somebody, as far as panelists, please speak up when you have a thought. We don't necessarily have to go in order, and you're welcome to speak to each other and follow each other's comments. What terms, how do you define trauma-informed education? And again, please try to keep that very brief, because that, that in itself could be a dissertation, right? So, because there are so many different terms, and most of the time I hear them being used incorrectly. So what is trauma-informed education for you, and what are the terms you use around that?
I could start. I've been working mainly with organizations in the New York City area, and New York City, 5 boroughs, that's a lot. And what I find is teaching organizations and schools in New York City about trauma-informed care. So it's building culture to understand and be conscious and aware of what is trauma. So when we are experiencing someone with a behavior, or our children with a particular challenging behavior, that we approach it with a trauma-informed care. So just a little bit more around that is that the organization has to create structures to support listening, empowerment, empathy, and of course, an environment that is being cared for. So anyone has to be cared for first before reactive to. So that's how I use it.
So yeah, care is okay. Thank you.
I think from a mental health standpoint, trauma-informed is really, first defining trauma as anything that threatens the integrity of the person, and that's either real by seeing something or perceived. And then when we talk about it from the standpoint of application, it's anything that really falls under the huge umbrella of what we call psychological first aid, as being tested, trauma tested through research that we know works and is approved by SAMHSA.
And in higher education, we train I was in teacher education as well, and we trained our students to be very aware, because today in today's society with social media, you're looking at all types of competencies. So you're looking at divorce. That could be trauma. That brings on trauma. You're looking at all first a mother, father, those type of things that are going on, and so in our world. And the main issue that we focus on today is suicide, which is trauma. So we always talk about resiliency, and resiliency brings on all types of what people can fall back on, especially children. And I now work with young children, focusing the minds of that. And we want and dealing with those operations that you spoke of. That is part of. That's part of trauma. And my one thing that I focus within the community is foster care and adoption. I worked as a CASA representative of youth males, and they have so much going on in this world delivering games and so many things. So like you said earlier, it's wide open as far as it, and I'm going to kind of focus on children and education on this platform.
Yes, and as you heard in their introductions, the nice thing about this panel is everybody works with a different group, different age children. So when they share, it's going to be within the framework of their expertise, which is a broad spectrum. It's fabulous.
Thank you. I would have to define trauma inclusive education as circumstances and maybe conditions beyond the child's control that's going to impact their learning in the classroom. And these circumstances and situations can happen outside the school as well as inside the school. The teacher can be responsible for this type of education. I am the only professor in the teacher education department that has 16 years of experience, and out of the 16 years of teaching in urban schools. And I truly believe it was divine intervention that I was placed in these high poverty schools, because once I got there, I didn't want to leave. I just loved it. And people always ask me, well, what is the ticket? Why are some teachers successful in urban schools and some aren't? And I define urban schools, high poverty, as those schools with at least 95% of the children receiving free or reduced lunch prices. And so just broadly, I would tell my pre-service teachers that the most important concept is developing relationships with your students. And then I asked them, well, how do you develop relationships? And they couldn't answer it. And I would hear comments that I have nothing in common with these children. Well, how do you know unless you talk to them? I bet you have more in common than you know. And I've become a masterful, or what Dr. Haberman would refer to as a star teacher, for teaching in these type of environments. But this year particularly, I have seen more white privilege than I care to in my pre-service teachers. And let me give you an example, a couple of examples. Okay, now keep in mind, I got 41 years of experience. And after this conference today, do you believe I'm having dinner with one of my former students from my second year of teaching? I'm still in contact with numerous students from the 80s. The very first day of class, I make a PowerPoint slide about my life, what it was like for me to grow up, attend Catholic school, that I lived in the suburbs. I went to college at UNC Wilmington. And the only time that me or my family went to Norfolk was if there was a show playing at the arena. So I had very little interaction with different cultures. And this slide portrays that. And I am really a sports fanatic. And that's one way that I connect with my students. And the boys are always impressed with everything I know about football and baseball. And so in my PowerPoint slide, I have a section, things I like. And of course, I put the Washington Commanders, sorry Raider fans, the New York Yankees, Pomeranians and Angels, things I don't like, the Dallas Cowboys and the Red Sox, and then I put my men. And in this section is Patrick Mahomes, Derek Jeter, A-Rod, Dwayne Wade, and LeBron James. And I made a comment that Dwayne Wade was shooting a basket. And I said, boy, look at those abs. Okay? And another time, I told a student who had a phone out that unless you're looking on Match.com for a man for me, put your phone away. Okay? Just a humorous way of asking a child politely without making a big deal. Well, I had students go to my department chair and complain about those practices, about calling those athletes my men, that I commented on Dwayne Wade's abs, and I joked about Match.com, which would be totally acceptable practices in a high poverty school. It's how I make my connections with my students. So I'm battling this pedagogy of poverty even at the university level.
In talking about trauma-informed care, I think there's a difference also between trauma-informed and trauma-skilled. And you can be aware of trauma, you can be aware of certain aspects, but unless you have the skills to be able to navigate that, it doesn't do you much good. And not only trauma-skilled, but trauma-competent. So there's stages beyond that than just trauma-informed that we certainly talk about as we're training our students in aspects of trauma. They're trained to respond to first responders with compassion fatigue. They're trained to work with survivors of out in the field, but they're also trained to work with the things that I think affect schools all the way across the board: suicide, domestic violence, divorce. I mean, these are all things that happen and complicate when situations where trauma occurs, because it will often reactivate our reaction to older trauma.
Just to put a cap on this before we move on to the next question, Chris Blodgett, Clear Academy, Washington State University, put forth actually a couple of years ago definitions of trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed, and trauma-focused. And I'm sorry to see it didn't gain any traction, but that's exactly, it's important to understand it's a journey, and there are levels of competency in that. And I continue to put forth his, shamelessly plug him, so that maybe we can all come up with a common understanding of trauma. And then the other piece is, just so everyone is clear, there are so many ways to define trauma. And so I'm gonna defer to Bruce Perry, who says, trauma is not what happens to you. It's what the brain does in response. Because we could never define traumas. What is a trauma for me might not be for Dr. Toledo. So we help educators understand it's not about trying to count all those things or guess them. It's just about understanding that if a child perceives that they're not safe, then whatever their perception is their trauma. So what do you see as one of the most important facets in this work as you work in the field of trauma education?
I would like to start because I think I'm in like that first phase of informing educators what is trauma, mm-hmm. and how to create an environment, a classroom that supports a child, the teacher first, because a teacher has to first understand their own trauma. Now, I am a believer that we all have trauma, but we all may not admit or confront our trauma. So a lot of our teachers get triggered by the children that they're serving because they're not making an impact on them somehow, or the child's behavior triggers them. So I do believe that teachers have to understand their own stuff and believe in trauma care for them to care for themselves. And then the school has to support the teachers in that I really need a break. I need a timeout, and I need to have somebody support me in that timeout. Or there's schools that are creating mindfulness centers, and the teacher's able to go into a Buddha booth. I'm shouting at my girl, buddhabooth.com, where they put booths in schools so you could close the curtain and just take 5 minutes for yourself. So starting with the teacher, and then having the teacher also creating an environment in the classroom that supports trauma. And we're not saying that the teacher should be a clinician. What we're saying is that the teacher could identify that the child has been triggered by trauma, and then at least regulate their behavior enough to either the child stay in the classroom or then have the child be supported by someone who has a clinical experience.
Don't you find, though, that, and my wife is a third grade teacher, so I put that out as disclaimer. But she's also trained as a clinician and has trained as a traumatologist. And there are techniques that teachers can use, simple, easy techniques that can redirect children in ways that don't cause or don't add to their trauma and doesn't continue to disrupt the room. Just a quick example. When a child acts out, very often a teacher will say, yell at a child and sit down, behave yourself, or go to the office. And what Kim will do is she'll walk over to where the student is and stand by the child, usually right behind them. Now, in most cases, the child calms down. So it doesn't raise the cortisol level inside their bodies. And because once the cortisol raises, that's 45 to 50 minutes that they are out. They are not going to be able to function properly within that period of time because it takes that amount of time to calm it down. So by just standing behind the child calms down, the lesson goes on, and nobody's disrupted. So.
Yes, we teach that there's old ways and there's new ways. The old way was to make it stop. That's what we used to focus, just stop the behavior. But the new way is to educate the teachers, educate the students, because they learn just as well as we do. Those behaviors that causes trauma. There's a trigger way. There's trigger ways that we focus on, and it's called fight, flight, and freeze. Have you heard of that? Yes. Fight, flight, and freeze. And that's what children are doing. The first thing they want to do is they want to fight. So the teachers has to recognize those skills. So by fighting, I mean biting, kicking, hitting, and you educate the kids on these are the rules. Like she's in early education. She's in early childhood. Your wife is third grade. And that's what I'm focusing on today. And we can go into other ones, but I'm focusing on early childhood. So in fight, we want to kind of calm that down as well as flight. They take off. They explode. They're so angry because there's so many types of trauma, as we are saying here on the stage. We're all agreeing to that. So you're focusing on that flight. How are you going to calm them down? So in her classroom, she has sensors, things that's like I have my educator and myself. I put a fluffy teddy bear so they can kind of lay down and soften the load, or something that's like if it's a little child, Sometimes they need something to hold and rock or whatever. So that's the flight, and the freeze is to just, okay, whatever we're doing now, we're going to put it to a halt, and we're going to let you kind of get it together. That's the freeze. So I'm going to talk about Dr. Alicia Liberman. She identifies 6 ways of fear, childhood fear. The first thing that a child fear, speaking on those terms when we're talking about teachers, is pain. They have to identify that a child is in pain. So you want to find out what the pain is of that kid. And like we emphasized earlier, that it may be parents going through a divorce, or maybe a cousin committed suicide, or whatever is going on. We have to find out what the pain is. And their fear of loss, a mother dying of cancer, trauma, that's trauma. And then losing approval. And I like the conversation that was held earlier about children trying to be approved with social media, and doing things that's accepted. Kids are under a lot of stress, more so than we are, because when I was growing up, we didn't have social media. So that's something, as far as they're always losing out, and it's okay to fail. They're where they're supposed to be. Our society has trained us to, you gotta be active, you have to keep going, you have to do those things to be successful. But then to train them that it's okay to fail, because that will kind of solve some of the trauma that's going on today, especially with social media. Fear of body damage. These kids are going through so much with their bodies nowadays, more so than we're going through. Trauma as far as the fighting, or I know in certain areas there are a lot of wounds of gunshots and things that are going on like that. So they're afraid of, have a fear of body damage, and fear of being bad. You know, what's bad, what's good. We have to tell them some things that are bad are really not bad, and some things that are bad that really are bad. But as teachers, especially early childhood, all teachers, we need to help the children know that they're where they're supposed to be. And disapproval, and fear of dying. I had a talk with my grandson, who's very, very young. He's 5 years old. And he mentioned something. He kept talking about death, because with games that are going on, they're learning how to shoot and kill. And we had a puppy that, well, he was a puppy. He was old. He was 14 years old, but he was still my puppy. He passed away last year in 2021. And I had to explain to him, Fluffy was his name. Fluffy died. And when Fluffy, like the video games that you see playing, and the kids are playing those games, when they die, they come up and they can do it over again. But when Fluffy dies, he can't come back. So educating students what reality is going on, because they understand. They understand as much as we did, because we didn't have social media. So I just want to emphasize those things, as far as the things that we're talking about in school. And self-help in module 6 in our trauma class, we talk about that we end of, teachers go through so much, that we teach self-care. How are you taking care of yourself?
I may cause some controversy with this statement, but I truly believe it in my heart. I still think universities across America is preparing teachers for middle class America. I do not believe that all teachers are meant to teach in a high poverty school that have students that experience a lot of trauma in their life, because they don't have the predispositions needed to be successful with that environment. I truly would like to see universities perhaps have 2 tracks, an urban track where we could identify the necessary predispositions to be successful in that environment, and through their teacher education program, develop them and strengthen them. Dr. Martin Haberman actually identified these different predispositions that teachers need to be successful in that type of environment. 20 years ago, when I was doing my dissertation, I knew I wanted to do something that dealt with urban schools, but I wasn't sure what. That was my hardest thing with my dissertation, was coming up with my question. And so somebody told me to read a book, and I even brought it. And it's called Star Teachers of Children in Poverty. And I read that book in one night. I couldn't put it down because it was everything that I experienced and I believed in. And I normally don't do these kinds of things. To athletes I do, but not to professionals. I called him up and I told him that his book was just amazing. And he actually developed a survey instrument, an interview, that can tell whether or not you have different predispositions that are needed to be successful in the urban school environment. I involved my university as well as another university in Virginia. And we were working as a professional development school model, thinking that's how we're going to tackle bettering our teachers to work with students experiencing trauma. And my results showed that both universities, we were not preparing students to work in this type of environment. And 20 years later, I think we're still at the same place.
That is so true. That is so true. And I have to comment on that. As working at a university, I left the university because of that. And there were a lot of people that looked like me. So I had to listen to people with research. And I tried to start a research and they pushed me to the side. No, we don't want to do that. But yeah, they were talking about diversity at the university. But then I'm saying to my students were like, could you please, of course, you teach your education, so you have to go out and visit students, teachers too. And they would say, I need help. And it was like, what you need, it takes more than me to come to your school. I go to conferences now and I hear these professionals and these researchers go and they talk about these things and as far as how to do, work with children of bad behavior, as they would call it. And then they'd say, don't give them time out. Don't. And it's like Dr. Wong. Dr. Wong 101. He stressed. He said, you're telling these kids not to do, the teachers. That's why teachers are stressed. And they're leaving the field. You're telling them not to do this and not to do. What do you do? How do you operate with them? And so that's very important. But one thing that I always say, those people that are on the stage using their data and their researching and everything, I say the best research you can show me is for those teachers to go inside the classroom unedited and record those teachers with those students that are in trauma. Those children, when I first started teaching, I started in Chicago, Illinois, and as a new teacher, they wanted me to go to Cabrini Green. I'll give you a picture of Cabrini Green. It was a place where the police men wouldn't want to go in. They handle their own business. And they sent me over there, a young, new, fresh teacher. And there were a lot of trauma, dead bodies, and kids walking to school, and there's a dead body in the morning, and how do you deal with people like that? So you're teaching different things from different areas. If I'm over in the suburban part of Chicago and they're having, all kinds of things with building money and fundraisers to a place where like Cabrini Green, where those children, that's how they see. So take a teacher in teacher education and take them to Cabrini Green and try to have them to teach there, they're not going to be successful. And a lot of teachers that are over there look like me. They look like me. We have to deal with those type of teachers. That's why we teach self-care.
You know, we're talking about a lot about teaching in schools here in this country, but these problems are worldwide. And teaching, when we deploy as students and sometimes therapists in the community, when they deploy with us into a culture where we spend a good amount of time, one of the things that we do is stop and talk to the teachers and the administrators of the schools. And we teach about trauma-informed care and abilities, and we give them some skills, but we want them to think about what's going on with these children. Because even in this country, we mislabel them. They're often seen as conduct disorders. They're seen as problem children. They're seen as anything but what's really going on, because very often they're dealing with PTSD from their environment. And if you don't pick that up, anything you do is not going to work. You've got to be able to meet them where they are and help walk them through and process what's happened to them.
Yeah, I just want to speak. There's a book, The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gibson, and him and his son wrote this book because we're normalizing trauma, and especially in urban, lower income, Black and brown children, we are, oh, that's just how they are. So that is making a huge impact in even feeling that you could learn. And the problem is that any child or even an adult that's in a learning environment that's overstimulated with trauma, from violence in the street to going home to abuse or a sick mom or family member, really cannot process information or don't have the desire to process information. So we have a lot of work to do, because unless we deal with the basics of understanding what is trauma informed for myself and for the people that I work for, we will not even get to the learning. So we're talking about after the pandemic that we slide a year and a half, most of our kids beyond. Where do we begin? Where do we begin? And I feel that even the pressure that our teachers have to meet their goals and their expectations of teaching also induces trauma. And we're having an influx of teachers leaving the field, because I'm gonna put myself out here. We are educators in the room, and believe me, all the myths and conversations we've having about educators, we're experiencing it in this conference. We're sitting here listening over and over and over and over, and it's because we've been doing it so long, we don't even know that it's not the best process. We got to change the process. We got to understand, how do we change how we learn and deal with our own stuff, and with each other be more, the networking is beautiful. But, I thought I was going to lay down on those chairs over there, because I was so exhausted. And after a while, the listening was going way over my head. So we're not even putting ourselves in a good environment for learning. So it's deeper than we got to start with us.
Just to add, a number of you referenced the flight of professionals from the field of education. Ed Week conducted a massive study throughout the pandemic, because people had nothing to do but answer Ed Week's questions. And what they predicted was that there was going to be a mass exodus when the children went back to school. 47% of all of the nation's public school educators left the field unprecedented. Never has happened in the history of professions, any of them, have that many people from one field left the field. And we have about 5-6 minutes left. Let's, Dr. Toledo, think about hope for the future, right? So there's got to be some hope in this work. You're all here, right? So you're resilient and you're staying in this profession. So finish this sentence for me for the few minutes we have left. In the future of education, I hope.
I hope we, as educators, really believe in creating an environment that we are serving the whole child from the inside out, including the teachers. So it's a community of learning that learning is a desire, not a have to.
Nice, thank you.
I would like to see factual research, not people thinking how their visions and their mission plans are one thing, but real visions of how they want all children in our society and in our world, in our communities. How, it sounds unrealistic, but I think those things can happen if we have factual research at the university level, at the teachers level, and in our community, at the churches. I think all these things would tie up if we have real factual information and it's truthful, honest. Honestly, I think that it can happen, but we all have to. We're here at Education 2.4. We need to really get to 4.0, not 2.0, 4.0. And I think we can do it if we show the data and actually show what is going on in the classrooms at the university level, as well as in the classroom, and higher education, high school, middle school, elementary, and childcare, post childcare, all of that. It needs to happen.
I hope that the universities can one day develop those teachers specifically for high poverty schools. I hope one day to be president so that I can make the necessary changes in education that has to be done. And again, I'm going to leave you with a controversial statement. Would we have this problem if the white middle class individuals were the ones in poverty and the others were living the middle class life?
And my hope is that we can teach teachers to be able to identify with all of these children their aspects of resiliency, their abilities to bounce back, their abilities to be successful. Because they're there. They're hiding, but they're there. And I think we get so deep into what's wrong, and especially with very disruptive children, that they don't see a future. They don't see that they'll ever graduate or have a life, a marriage, a job. And they live for now, which is why they go to the streets and they go to the gangs and they turn to drugs. We need to really help to empower the aspects of resiliency in children, and quite honestly, all children, even older children in college and graduate school.
Just in response to your statement, do you know that more students that have special needs graduate than African American males?
Children without fragile learning, exactly. Yes,
And that's alarming.
so I think to summarize and conclude, Yes, we've lost a lot of people in the last year to this profession, but there are always, thanks to the universities, I want to give you guys a nod, new teachers are coming in with a lot of hope and a lot of energy. But I think the way forward for educators around the world, thank you for that point, is we heard about white privilege, we've heard about equity, we've heard about the various types of trauma that can occur to the teachers as well as to the students. I think, how about if we move forward taking care of ourselves and figuring out who we are as we go forward? 56% of the nation's public school children are Black and brown, and 75% of the nation's public school teachers are white middle-class women. And so it'll be a long time before that starts to turn in a different direction. In the meantime, though, I have seen teachers work miracles with children with autistic challenges who don't have autism themselves. This is something we can do. It is something I think that educators are drawn to. And so I invite you all to put yourselves first and dig around in your own backpacks so that you can show up for the people that you serve, whatever age they are.
I so appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you, Ed 2.0, for having us.
We got
And I
13
got 12 seconds left, so I might as well use it. I just wrote a book on classroom management, focusing on high poverty schools. It should be in press. Well, it's in press now. It should be out maybe February or March. And it's about students taking ownership of the classroom and actually creating their own world, with me serving as the facilitator. I'll make sure it's at a reasonable price because we know our salaries. But after I wrote that book, I felt like my career has been complete.
Great. Okay, thank you all very much.
Yes, can we give Dr. Mellisa a hand for wonderful?
Thank all of you.